I would like to formally welcome you to today's webinar, Preventing Abuse and Neglect, Don't Wait for an Intervention, with our guest speaker, Lesley Taylor. Lesley is the founder of NAPCAN. She founded it in Northern Territory in March 2000 as the sole agency committed to preventing child abuse and neglect from occurring. And until recently, primary prevention and early intervention in the NT and across Australia has been seen as less important than responding to child abuse after it's occurred. Having worked in child protection for more than 10 years, Lesley realised that there was an alternative to investing in the child protection system and removing children from their families. The best way to care for children is to support their families and invest in communities to become child-friendly and child-safe. Creating a child-safe culture remains at the core of NAPCAN's work across Australia. I'll now hand you over to Lesley for her presentation and an acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Hi everyone. This is an incredible opportunity to be able to share these ideas and thoughts with you around how we can prevent child abuse and neglect from happening and the things that we can all do to contribute to that shift in culture. It's very hard not being able to see people, so looking forward to seeing some of your questions as we go through this process. So first, of course, I'd like to acknowledge the country on which I'm speaking today and acknowledge the elders of the past and the present and those emerging leaders of the future, and pay my enormous respects and the privilege to be able to speak about the protection of children across all cultural groups today. So I come from the Central Desert. I live in Yulara, which is about 20 minutes from the Rock. So if you're ever in the area, come and visit. I'm at the fire station, work from the spare room, but part of NAPCAN is pretty exciting. You're allowed to work pretty much anywhere, and we connect with people through internet, through obviously webinars, through workshops that we deliver right across Australia. So here's a little picture of my backyard. So that's the field of lights in the daylight. I think most people only go in the nighttime, but anyway, I thought it was an interesting shot. That's my favourite camel, Hugo, very polite, very friendly, and some flowers, a bit of a mad flower picture taker. So NAPCAN, okay, so this is the organisation that I'm presenting with today, and NAPCAN is committed to the protection of children, about the safety and the well-being of children. Our vision is that every children have the right to be safe and that we can actually contribute to a child-safe world for our children. We're pretty committed to helping children develop to their full potential and supporting parents to be able to achieve that, and supporting communities to look after families and children. So my background, as Dale said, is in child protection. I had 10 years in child protection before I saw the light and realised that we can actually get involved earlier when families first start experiencing difficulties and actually really wanting help, that we could actually achieve that for them. I'm also a member of the ARACY Early Childhood Chapter, which is a lovely privilege, and I enjoy being able to learn more about early childhood development and ways that we can promote that knowledge across Australia. Okay, so the way I was going to start was to talk about, I suppose, childhood. What was happening to children in colonial Australia? So when Australia was colonised, children were not being treated particularly well in England. So when you think about the values and attitudes towards children, this picture by the artist William Hogarth shows the atrocities that happened to children. Children were used as a labour force. As soon as they could work, they were put into, often work camps. Children were left in orphanages. Orphanages were used as a workforce. Children were taken from orphanages and used as chimney sweeps. They certainly had no rights. Women had no rights, but children had even less. They were just possessions. There were entire, when you think about the values of children or how we value children. So when the Australia was first colonised, those values about children were transported with them. So they introduced those values into Australia. where children were not particularly valued, they didn't have rights. In fact, the first case of child abuse was investigated under the animal cruelty legislation because there were no laws around the protection of children. So I think that's interesting and challenging, and it shows us how far we've come, but also how far we still have to go for children to be valued the way they need to be and recognised. So in contrast, you look at this story, which is a Noongarra story from Noongarra, which is from northwest New South Wales. So this story is a traditional story from many thousands of years ago and has been passed through the generations. Shows children painted in pink. You can't sort of see that properly in this picture of the painting, but children were painted pink because that was a sacred colour. It was a colour that was allowed. The red ochre was allowed to be mixed in. The way Tex Skewthorpe explained this to me, who's the painter and who shared this knowledge with NAPCAN to be able to produce those posters, talks about the mum and dad with the protection they were afforded being passed on to the next generation. So the arms of the mum and dad are also painted pink, symbolising the protection they experienced as children being passed on to their child. And if you can see, there's a series of circles beside mum and a series of circles beside dad that show the mother's family and the father's family also taking responsibility for the protection of that child. And then underneath those figures in the poster, you can see all the other families in that community who also contribute to the protection and safety of that child. And there's leaves and communication symbols at the top of the poster that talk about the environment and the role that the environment plays in the safety and well-being of children. So really what's pretty incredible about this story from thousands, many thousands of years ago is that this is actually the ecological approach to prevention that is like the cutting edge of knowledge around prevention today. Pretty extraordinary. So, yeah, I'd absolutely encourage people to access those posters. The stories are all on the back of them, but they're very powerful stories that show the difference between what was happening in England at the time when Australia was colonised and those terrible values and attitudes towards children that had basically no rights at all, versus this that talks about children being surrounded by family, by extended family, by community networks and by the environment in which they lived. Yeah, so thought that was interesting. And you know what? Thank goodness times have changed. So I don't know about anyone else, but I experienced the cane at school when I was young, and that certainly doesn't happen today. And that's a good thing because we know better. And as we learn things and as we know better about how to raise children and what children are entitled to, we need to change accordingly. So here's some advertising that took place in the 50s and 60s. How soon is too soon to give your child a diet of fizzy drinks? It's never too soon enough, according to the advertising. Children were actively encouraged to have fizzy drinks. And again, we know better. And as we learn more, sorry about that, I'm just having some difficulties. There we go. So as we know better, then we need to change. Oh, this is another good advertising. A case of Blatt's beer in your home means much to the young mother, and obviously baby participates in its benefits. Yeah. So, yeah, now we know better and we change our behaviour accordingly. So it'll be interesting to think about what the next generation will be thinking about the way we treat children and the way we promote children in our advertising. What do we currently think of as acceptable that will be quite challenging for the next generation? Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. So really what we're talking about here is about how to focus on prevention, how to value prevention versus relying on a crisis response to situations that are quite harmful to children. How do we reduce the risk of things going wrong instead of just waiting for things to become a crisis and then responding? One of the things that we do know is that prevention in many other contexts works a treat. So the changes in seatbelts, in laws around seatbelts, save lives almost immediately. Immunisations is another very powerful strategy in the health arena that demonstrates that prevention works rather than responding to illness. And I thought this was kind of cool. More doctors smoke Camel cigarettes than any others. My mum was actively encouraged to smoke to help with her nerves in raising 4 small children. So actively encouraged versus now when we know more that smoking is not okay and not healthy for children and young people, obviously. So what I'm going to do now is try and do something very clever and take you to a video of the continuum of well-being. You can actually see me in action.
We at NAPCAN are hoping to share ways to promote the safety and well-being of children and prevent child abuse and neglect. We all have a part to play in the protection of children, and I'd like to describe that to you in what I refer to as the continuum of well-being. On one end of the continuum we have child-safe families, where children are loved and nurtured and cared for, where if children cry, they're comforted, if they're hungry, they're fed, and if they're grizzly, then there's someone to play with them. It's kind of like a perfect family, except of course there is no such thing as a perfect family. We all make mistakes as we try to do the best job we can in the very difficult job of raising our children. However, on the other end of the continuum, what you have are those tragic stories that we have all read about that describe horrific circumstances that have happened to children, and we think, how on earth did it get so serious? How on earth did that happen to that child in that family? Where were all the people in the lives of that child? Where was the extended family, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins? Where were the neighbours and the friends of that family? And where were all the professionals, the teachers, the doctors, the other adults that have seen something going terribly wrong in the life of a child and didn't take action? So child abuse, you see, can be a one-off incident, but it is more likely to be a series of events. It's a sequence of events that gets steadily worse over time until it reaches what we refer to as the threshold, the point at which child protection can get involved in the life of a child. Now that threshold is defined by the legislation in each state and territory, and it defines the point at which child protection services or the police can get involved and make decisions about the life and the safety of a child with or without a parent's consent. Now, we wouldn't tolerate child protection getting involved every time we make a mistake, every time a parent yells at a child or forgets to pack a nutritious lunch. So that threshold remains quite high, and it explains the frustration that many people would feel trying to ring child protection about their serious concerns about a child and child protection not seeming to take action. It's because child protection doesn't have the right to get involved until it reaches that threshold defined by the laws in that state or territory. So everything that happens before that threshold then is an opportunity for you and I to take action, to do something to stop that sequence of events from continuing. This is where you and I can support families to ask for help from professional services in the community. We can actually lend a helping hand ourselves with families who are experiencing difficulties raising their children. We can look out for children, all children, not just our own. We can also lobby to change the legislation around corporal punishment. We all have a role to play in promoting the safety and well-being of children. Let's all contribute to creating a child-safe Australia.
Okay, so hopefully that is a little bit helpful in understanding what is often referred to as the threshold, the point at which child protection get involved in the lives of children. It creates enormous confusion and enormous stress. Okay, so just going on to the next slide. So I suppose just to go back to that video a little bit and to talk about it is that prevention is often confused, is often lumped together with early intervention. And the other thing about early intervention is it's often lumped in with late intervention. So I've heard people talk about early intervention as being for highly vulnerable families at risk of coming into the child protection system. I don't regard that as early intervention at all. That's quite late intervention. That's waiting until the problem is so serious that it's almost a child protection matter. So in NAPCAN, we really value how do we support families to function really well and to continue to function really well in their community. And some of the things that we do know about how to talk about parenting is to promote child development and to promote the things that children need in order to thrive, so that the way we talk about it is how do we promote the development of children to do really well emotionally, socially, physically, and what are the skills that we need to share with parents to be able to achieve that. That's the conversation that we're hoping to have with families and communities right across Australia. So what are the things that we are doing quite well around children in Australia? It's the introduction of children's commissioners is a relatively new phenomena, and it is a fabulous change that we've made around valuing children enough that they have their own National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, who does an incredible job of promoting the rights and the wellbeing of children right across Australia. And I don't know if people are aware that the appointment of an e-safety commissioner to protect the rights of children online, another incredible shift of valuing children and respecting their rights online and in the real world. So, and there's some incredible resources that are available, certainly on that Children's e-safety commissioner's site if people want to look at it. One of the things that I really like doing is gathering together resources that work well in having conversations about children and children's safety. So if anyone has any fabulous resources that they like, that they use to promote those conversations, to have sometimes difficult conversations about children's safety, I'd love to hear about them. We do a lot of work to develop resources and tools that help people that people can use in a very practical way to turn theory into practice. That's what we like doing. Here's our National Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell, talking with young people and children. She regularly travels around Australia, gathering together the voices of children and young people to determine what we can do, and basically to be able to hear their voices, to be able to listen to children, to be able to hear their voices and to be able to act on them. So these are wonderful things that have made changes. And it's all really part of a public health approach to child protection, instead of it being about, so this is a way of thinking and a way of approaching child abuse. It's a multi-pronged approach that requires legal sanctions, as I said in the video about legislating against the corporal punishment of children. It's about using evidence that helps us to change our attitudes and ultimately change our behaviours. Again, like those advertising of the 50s, what are the things that we've learnt now that help us to know more about children and what we have to do to change, to better look after them? It's around social marketing campaigns, sending out messages that are really positive messages around children and young people, and about the skills that we want parents to have to raise their children to be strong and healthy and functioning. Community education, community workshops. And one of the things that we cannot forget is the importance of respectful relationships for everyone. We value, basically, if you think about respectful relationships, is the opposite of domestic violence. It's the opposite of violence in relationships. It's relationships where boys and girls and women and men and women all can treat each other with dignity and respect in their relationships and outside of them. So that's what we should be aiming for. And the amazing Rosie Batty call for respect for relationships for all. And we applaud her efforts and hope that we can keep progressing down that path to give children and young people an opportunity to make different choices in life. And of course, the other changes for good is that we are actively engaging children in conversations, as you can see there with Megan Mitchell. Children are engaged, we value their contribution, we listen to what they have to say, and we make changes accordingly. Here's just another example of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child that talks about the children's right to be heard, the children's right to be safe, and the children's right to be valued and to live within their family, but for that family to be a safe place. So one of the resources that NAPCAN developed that turns that theory about children need to be regarded as clients in their own right. Just an example about how you can turn a theory into practice is we developed this little resource, a book that helps people who work with children and young people in crisis accommodation, in homelessness services, where children are attending with their parent, often with their mum in women's crisis accommodation services. So this is a book that allows children to be introduced into the service, to learn about what the service is with games and activities and an opportunity to actually sit down with the children and ask them what's happening for them and to explore their feelings. And if children can have that opportunity to be part of developing a safety plan for themselves and with their parent before they leave that service. That's a fabulous resource that is being used currently right across the Northern Territory, but we're pretty keen to explore its value in other homelessness services in other states and territories. So if there's anyone working in those facilities, I'd love to hear from you about the resources that you use in the other states and territories around children as clients in their own right in these services. So now we're just going to move on to what the key protective factors are. So we are very often familiar with the risk factors that can contribute to child abuse and neglect. But if we just focus on the protective factors, I think first it can show us some really key directions to take as we move forward, becoming better and better at protecting children. It is always about access to quality childcare. So we know the evidence is very clear that access to quality childcare improves the safety and well-being of children. So we would like to promote this as a core protective factor that is of enormous value to families. For children to be engaged in their education, for children to be able to have that opportunity to be part of a schooling system that nurtures them and values them, and that parents and families are able to get their kids to school and to promote school as an important option to give children choices in life. It's about healthy relationships, and I think I talked a little bit about that in terms of respect for relationships. One of the programs that NAPCAN delivers that's probably the most familiar with, you'd be most familiar with, is called Love Bites, a sexual violence and violence prevention program that gives young people an opportunity to learn about what a healthy relationship looks like, what an unhealthy relationship looks like, and to make decisions for themselves and for their peers around making changes. It's also around promoting the need for parents to have additional skills that children need. Social development, they need emotional development, they need physical development. There's many things that children need in order to be able to thrive. And how can we support parents to develop the skills to help children achieve the best for themselves as they grow? I call it having a plan B. Parents having a bag of tricks, a bag of tools that they can use to help them to raise their children and to manage any difficulties along the way. There's also enormous value and recognition in the research around home visiting after the birth of their first child. These programs are being trialled right across Australia, and it's an exciting opportunity to give parents support when they have their first child and are really receptive to hearing information and to getting support and to getting the knowledge that they need to raise their children well. And housing. Housing is a critical element that can improve the well-being of families and certainly improve the safety of children. What we're looking for is children to be loved and nurtured and connected to family, to community and culture. We want children to be treated with dignity and respect. So here's another resource that NAPCAN developed in partnership with SNAPE, the Secretariat for National Aboriginal and Islander Childcare. I think they're called the Voices of Our Children now. They've recently changed their name, which is exciting. And also with the Council of Social Services in the Northern Territory. So this is a code of ethics. It's called Our Kids Safe and Strong. It's a code of ethics. It's like an inspirational document that helps people who work with children and young people to realise the responsibility that they have to those children, to put them first, to be a positive role model around them. So really keen to share that resource with people. This is being used by many organisations as part of their orientation for new staff. So you have conversations around their responsibilities to be the best person they can be around children, as a way of bringing that up in an organisation when people first start. So this is a really critical part around what we now know is needed as part of organisations being child safe. This is what we've learned from the Royal Commission into organisational responses to child sexual abuse, is that children need to be recognised and their voices need to be heard in those organisations. And this is, again, another way of turning that theory about hearing the voices of children and turning it into practice. Here's some other, what we always find are incredibly helpful resources from, it's called the Kids Central Toolkit, and I really actively encourage you to have a look for these resources about promoting the rights, about engaging children in conversations around things that worry them, things they're concerned about, how to tune in, I suppose, to children and tune into what's happening for them and what's important for them, so that you can hear what's going on in their lives and be able to make a difference. Oh, and you'll love this. So this is ideal. So this is called the Children's Voices Project. So what it is it says it just actively encourages children to tell us what you like best about your community. You can draw it, or you can write it, or you can tell a grown-up and they can write it down for you. And then we ask children to, again, think about what they would like to change about their community. So in a very simple way, you can actually hear those voices of children about what's important in their lives and what's not working, and do something about it. We were very fortunate to be able to work with a remote school in the Northern Territory that introduced this project with every single child in the school. It was the Nooka School, and they asked every child to contribute. And the wonderful thing about what happened with that school is that when they received the feedback from children about what they would like to change about their school community, those changes were built into that school's strategy for the future. So not only did they hear what kids had to say or interested enough to ask them, they heard it and they made the changes. Very exciting. So we're pretty impressed with how this can be adapted into a variety of different settings, including in a remote community school. So depending on whatever that community is for children. And many organisations are also using this tool to review what's working in their organisation for children. Here's some interesting information about when you ask children what they say. Now, there's the obvious ice cream truck, but if you ignore the ice cream truck for a second, but who doesn't like one of those? It is about when children value friendliness in their neighbourhood. Nice people around them, people that say hello, parks to play in, places where and for it to feel like a safe place for them, where the adults in that community care for them. The other thing that children love when they are asked to is that they like their school to be friendly, they like their friends to be places they can meet with their friends and play, which is where the parks come in. Children like shops and they like having fun. And what was interesting for us is that there is almost an identical process for asking children in urban communities as in remote communities, and the enormous similarities between what children want. They value a safe community. They value kind people around them. They value it when there's places to play and places to go, and that it's clearly a child-friendly place. When you ask children about what's hard about living in their community, it was interesting as well for us in NAPCAN is that we learnt that children actually find people fighting anywhere as being something that makes them uncomfortable. No surprises there. The same way that they said that they like friendly people around them, unfriendly and antisocial behaviour makes children feel incredibly uncomfortable in their own communities. So lots of lessons to learn there. And when we ask adults, so NAPCAN did a survey of around 100, we received a survey response from around 100 parents from right around the Northern Territory, and they said that they too wanted places to meet, the same as children. The adults want places to meet other families where they can have fun and socialise and learn from each other and to feel safe in their own community. So it's very similar in lots of ways. The other thing that children right across the Northern Territory didn't like was speeding cars. Feel very unsafe when people are speeding for obvious reasons. So that's just some feedback that we had from parents and from children. So yeah, here I just noticed they want social events, alcohol-free social events, which really is about opportunities to meet each other and to develop those social networks that make life so much easier as a parent when you're raising the children. And in fact, parents valued friendly schools even more than children, which I thought was interesting as well. Okay, so I'm pretty much coming to the end of the presentation now, and we have another film clip to show in a minute. Hopefully I'll do that quite well. But I did want to talk to you about the amazing Yuri Bronfenbrenner. Yuri Bronfenbrenner was a researcher into children who first discovered, I suppose, the concept about resilience, about children's ability to overcome adversity. And his research into, he actually discovered a whole group of children, adults. He was working with adults who had experienced extreme adversity and abuse as children. And out of those adults, he found a discrete group who seemed to be untouched by the difficulties they'd experienced as children, absolutely untouched. He actually referred to them as untouchables, that their experience of abuse hadn't impacted on them they were having. They had children of their own, they had relationships, they were getting on with their life and in a very secure and stable way. And what he found when he explored into the lives of those untouchables, he found that each one of them had one adult, at least one adult in their life that thought they were amazing. In some of those cases, it wasn't even a member of their family. Just someone who thought they were amazing was enough for them to be able to overcome incredible adversity. So my challenge to everyone is be a Bronfenbrenner, be that one person for a child. Just let them know you think they're fantastic, especially the feisty kids that sometimes others might find a bit difficult to manage. But every child deserves to have someone in their life that thinks they're amazing, and we need to tell them that. Okay, so I'm just going to finish up before I get some questions, hopefully some questions for people about prevention, is to show this film clip called Children See, Children Do, which is a very short film clip about the power of being a positive role model in the life of a child. So let's see if we can get this going.
It looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so.
Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English.
Go back where you came from.
Is that what you think?
One thing that we can all do right away is just recognise the power that we have as a role model for children who see us in our communities. So one of the things that I did want to do before I finished was just to, I suppose, promote the opportunity for people in Canberra or perhaps even in New South Wales to attend the ARACY and NAPCAN forum that's going to take place, the Child Abuse Prevention Forum that's going to be on the 3rd of September as part of Child Protection Week on Monday the 3rd of September from 10:30 to 1. It's at the Department of Education. Whereabouts is it located? The Department of Education. Just the theatre on 50 Marcus Clark Street in Canberra. So really keen for people to see if they want that opportunity to hear Professor Darryl Higgins from the Institute of Child Protection Studies, Natalie Lewis, and myself, as well as Alistair Roy, who was a Churchill Fellow and a ARACY Middle Years Network convener. So that's another opportunity to learn more about prevention in another forum during Child Protection Week coming up soon. So any questions?
Hi there, this is Diana Harris. I'm the General Manager for Projects and Programs at ARACY, and I will be your panel moderator for the questions. We're getting some terrific feedback through, and I'll start just by sharing some of that with Lesley today. Lesley, people have said some terrific things about today's presentation, and I don't think that's surprising. Mitzi, you're not the only one who's been smiling and nodding along. Amanda Doxey says that we are all familiar with the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, but it's also true that that can be reversed. It can take a child to raise a village, and I think that plays to what you were saying about parks and play spaces and public spaces which welcome children and families, creating healthy communities.
Absolutely, that's very exciting, yes.
Just before we get into the questions, this has been a presentation which has been very rich in resources, and some people are chipping in on the chat as well with some resources of their own that they'd like to contribute to. Dale is going to capture all of those and make sure that they're included and made available to people when they watch this webinar back, and also for the people who are here today.
Excellent.
So, yes. Question from Leanne Covey, who would like to know your thoughts on what the key intervention points are for families at risk.
Key intervention points. I suppose it depends what the issue is that the family is having. One of the things that we want to do is to provide more information to families about child development. Just knowing what children need is a very powerful opportunity for parents to be able to meet those needs. Is one of the things that we first do. But it does depend on what that issue is that the parent's wanting, but that there is somewhere for parents to go to get help when they need that, and that parents are actively encouraged to be able to do that for their children.
Terrific. And we've got another question here, which is from Nikki. Nikki and also Stephanie from White Ribbon Australia, which is around whether we have statistics on parents of children who have been removed from their homes. Have the parents been more likely to experience abuse?
We do know that many children who have experienced abuse and neglect do not go on to become abusive as parents. But when you do explore the data around parents who hurt children, that there is an experience of harm in their own lives. Yeah, so you need both of those viewpoints to make sense of that. But most children who experience that adversity do not go on to harm children. And I think that's really important for us to know, because when you're also talking with families and you're talking to people, it's important to not let anybody think that because they've experienced abuse that it's somehow irreversible and that they will go on to harm others. That's a really important message that I undertake everywhere I go, especially in remote locations where there is such adversity and people do experience such harm, levels of harm and observations of violence that perhaps other communities don't see as much.
We don't have to let that history write the current story.
Absolutely.
So a question from Liz Walker, talking about children seeing and children doing, what's NAPCAN's response to the availability of online porn these days? And Liz says that research shows that it's contributing to a rise on child and peer-on-peer sexual abuse.
And I think that one of the things that we need to talk about is encouraging families to talk to children about what they're seeing online. So if children have access to the internet, then it is likely that they have access to pornographic or inappropriate or even antisocial behaviours. So one of the things that we need to get the message out, and there's certainly fabulous resources by the eSafety Commissioner exactly around this, how to ensure that children are safe online, is around providing skills to parents to manage those conversations about what children are seeing and how they're interpreting it. Even things in the media that children are seeing that perhaps previous generations didn't see. So, Lesley, I'd be really keen to talk to you some more about this, but the issue of pornography impacting children's behaviour is very real. And so parents need to spend time tuning in to their kids on a regular basis to talk about their feelings, to talk about what they've seen, and to help them to make sense of some inappropriate things that they've seen so that they can process it and make good decisions. And again, it's a call for respect for relationships. Let's teach children alternative ways to behave towards each other. What's okay and what's absolutely not okay.
Okay, yes. So another question from Leanne. Have you come across any intervention programs which seem to have a greater long-term impact?
Oh, yes. I love that question. Oh, Leanne, well done. There are many, many programs. In fact, if you were to look at the NAPCAN's Play Your Part Awards that we hand out every year, there are some incredible programs and resources right across Australia that are demonstrating a real impact in changing behaviour, changing attitudes, and ultimately behaviour. There's just so many I don't even kind of know where to start. But I do know that there's programs around volunteer home visiting programs, reading to children. There's just so many. Yeah, so please go onto the NAPCAN website and look at the Play Your Part winners from previous years. You will find a plethora of programs across a wide range, from children-focused to adolescent-focused to family-focused to parent-focused to community-focused.
Terrific. So Amanda is sharing a personal story about when intervention came too late with her grandchildren, and saying that things had escalated very, very seriously before she was able to get family and community services on board. Is there any way that we can encourage government to be more preventative?
That has been my lifelong journey, is to value the fact that we need to support families when they want it. Why can we not respond to someone who needs help? Why are we investing only in a crisis response to families? That's, as Leanne was saying, why does it have to be that late? When children are harmed and families are fractured and communities suffer the consequences, it's just plain good sense to get involved earlier. There is a massive shift in many states and territories towards valuing prevention, but it is very difficult when child protection systems are so dominant, and a crisis response dominates much of the thinking, much of the research, and much of the action. So, so there's a big shift afoot in many states and territories. So everyone needs to get on board to value prevention, talk to your local members and politicians around the value of prevention, that we can support families earlier. And it's so incredibly cost effective to the community and to that family, but most importantly to the child.
I think Amanda would agree with you, as would we all. Now, Deborah has a related question, which is for facilitating and focusing on increasing and improving the protective factors for children. Who are the key players? Who's working in this space?
Not enough people are working in this space. So certainly, wonder what do you mean, Deborah? Who's working in this space? As in which organisations or which governments or which states?
What Deborah said is, who are the key players if we're to facilitate and focus on improving protective factors for children? Are you talking in the individual sense, Deborah, or are you talking about at a sort of systems level? We'll just wait and see if Deborah's able to jump in and clarify that question.
So NAPCAN, just in case I've got something right, Deborah, that NAPCAN works and partners with a huge range of organisations right around Australia around prevention and early intervention. So we are quite keen to talk with anyone around that. And certainly, so every organisation that ARACY works with, so that early childhood chapter is a perfect example about promoting children and promoting children's rights. So if you were to look at the ARACY website around organisations involved in that early childhood chapter. So anything that promotes child development or any organisation that promotes child development is working in that space. So early childhood services, child and maternal health nursing services, even all those fabulous universal programs like libraries, childcare centres, child and maternal health nurses, I think I said that. Yeah, so anyone who's working in that space is part of that network that supports families to get help earlier.
Yes, and that is something that ARACY seeks to promote and share the evidence as those programs are evaluated, and we continue growing the evidence base there. I'm just going to go backwards a wee bit to go back to pornography and online effects on children. Inez Carver is going to share with us some resources around protecting children from pornography and image-based abuse. So thank you very much, Inez, and we'll make sure that those are included in the list of resources that's going to come out of today. Now, Deborah's expanded on her question. She's a coordinator for Communities That Care, working in partnership with local organisations, including schools and community health. But she says that you've answered her question, so good one.
Thanks, Deborah.
And Amanda's just following up on her experience and saying it's so disappointing that the Family and Communities Department, that team that she worked with, would only tell her we don't have enough resources.
Yeah, and that has to shift. We have to do that for families and for those children. How outrageous when somebody's calling out for help that we don't provide that. It's more than disappointing. Actually, it's a shame.
It's a tragedy. Amanda is also saying how much she appreciates your comment about having one person, that one person who can change a child's life. For Amanda, that was her nana. And thank you, Amanda. So Lisa's saying there's a lot of investment by states currently into family violence, but it still appears to be driven by a response lens. What strategies can we use to demonstrate the benefits of prevention from a cost-benefit approach, advocating for further investment in prevention?
I suppose we look at the evidence base, and I think this is where ARACY comes into it in such a big way, because it actually can demonstrate that the evidence shows that things are better for children, things are better for families, and that it is actually cost effective. The same way that we learned around immunisation, how powerful that is, the return for your investment dollar in prevention. So there is some research that has come out around the dollar value, and I think that's a good argument to have. Let's talk about it actually saves our communities millions of dollars every child where abuse does not occur, where that abuse is prevented from, or where those harmful circumstances are not allowed to continue, is a huge investment. It saves money, it saves lives.
I think so. I'll just jump in there as well. and echo what Lesley is saying. I think we're also seeing a shift towards evaluating programs in a different way. Lesley, you've mentioned nurse home visiting or home visiting after childbirth a couple of times. Yeah. And as most of you know, I think ARACY is involved in a partnership with a sustained nurse home visiting program that is undergoing a randomized controlled trial, but part of that is also economic modelling. KPMG have come on board to do that. Now, it's hard to find indicators that we can use, that the data is there, that we can baseline against, but we're trying to do that and get that economic argument, make that business case for these preventative strategies. So we have another question from Sue Packer, which is that it's concerning that we respond to children and families as problems and challenges, and we don't see them as critical assets for the future of Australia. That's a responsibility for all of us, not just their parents.
Well said, Sue. As usual, you are an amazing person and a fabulous advocate for children everywhere you go.
And we have another question from Jennifer, who is thanking you for a very engaging conversation on the public health model for child wellbeing. She's asking about the role of alcohol as an accelerant in violent behaviour. How can a long-term national community education strategy be advocated?
I am absolutely on board with the need to address the impact that alcohol has on the lives of children. Some fabulous research that was undertaken, NAPCAN-supported research, I can't think of it right now, but I will provide this after, around the fact that when we talk to children about the things that distress them, it's people around them that drink. Drink makes people, or alcohol makes people's behaviour unpredictable, and and children are really vulnerable as a result of that unpredictable behaviour. So we do have to address the fact that alcohol is a contributor to an unsafe environment for children as part of any strategy. The same way we have to address housing and inadequate housing and overcrowding, we also have to address the need for alcohol reduction strategies to take place at the same time. So all of these things that impact on the life of a child has to be incorporated into a strategy, into a real prevention strategy. It's an excellent point, Jennifer.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Lesley. We're just about at the end of our time here. So I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone listening for your presentation. And I would also like to thank those people listening for being with us today, particularly those of you, and there are many, who are jumping on board and sharing other resources that use.
We'll make sure all of those are collated on the ARACY website, and we'll also feed those back to you, Lesley, for wherever you share your resources too.
My pleasure. Thanks very much. It's been quite nerve-wracking, but I've enjoyed the experience.